Glad to see each of you back this evening. It is a time in just a few minutes that we will take to honor our high school graduates this year. There are 5, and they've certainly come to a milestone in their life. They've come to a time in their life that too is challenging on the sense of, for the last many years, they knew exactly what they were going to do, what mom and dad told them to do. Well, kind of along with that, what school they'd be in, and that from one year to the next, what grade they would be in. And suddenly now, all of these choices in front of them. And sometimes people say the rest of your life, it's unfolding, or you've got the entirety of your life in front of you. That could be said at any age, but it seems to particularly hold true when we're young and we kind of reach a milestone and move from one thing to another. Tonight I've chosen a lesson to preach that it's one I heard at least 2 times growing up. We had a preacher that was with us at Cottondale Church of Christ for, I guess, about the time I was in 5th or 6th grade to after I'd gone to college. And I think twice he presented this lesson, and I remembered it in the sense that there were some things about it that was just kind of corny, the way he worded it. But you know, as I look back and look at this lesson, I'd have to say this. Everything he said was true, and everything he said should be heeded. And yes, it was a lesson to the youth. It wasn't necessarily a lesson to graduates, but much of this lesson really touches the entirety of the congregation, because we've not lived so long, but what we still need to keep doing right. This lesson is called 10 Commandments for Youth. And the first of the 10 Commandments, don't let your parents down. They brought you up. Now, I've heard sometimes people say, I brought you into this world and you can be sure I can take you out. Don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before, but usually that's said at a time where mom and dad's not very happy. And maybe something has been done or something said that they didn't approve of, and they were very upset at the time. I can tell you from a perspective of, I'm 61. My dad, if he were living this year, would be 100 years old. But I can tell you this, whether I'm 18 years old, 38, 58, now 61, if my dad were still living, at any point along that way, I did not want to disappoint my dad. And I know someone might say, well, what about your mom? My mom died at 53, I was 25. But the same thing's true. I would not want to disappoint my mom. And it boils down to this. You see, they wanted the best for me. And they wanted things that were compatible to the Christian life. And above all, they wanted me to go to heaven. To disappoint them? No, it would not have been. It would not have been the career I chose, unless it was illegal, immoral, or unethical. I didn't have to be a preacher, as it were, to make them proud. No, if I had decided to give up on our Lord, if I had decided on habits that would have been destructive in my life, if I had been disrespectful to them, well, all of those things, that would have been the disappointment. Don't let your parents down, for they brought you up. Second is be smart. Obey your parents. You will give orders one day yourself. You know, as you look at the Bible's clear in so many places. The idea of children obey your parents. In fact, in Romans chapter 1, verses 24 through 32, disobedience to parents is listed amongst almost every imaginable sin. You think about something that's really bad, and right in the midst of that, disobedience to parents. You go to Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Obedience to parents. When children reach these ages, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, well, those are some of the most difficult parenting years. Because when a child is 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, it's kind of like they're under your complete control. But the older they get and the more they mature, that hold that they have begins to loosen. And for the parent with that child that is reaching those upper teen years and in their 20s, during this period of time, knowing how much to loosen, knowing when to loosen that grip is difficult. That's a frustrating time sometimes for youth, because it's kind of like, I'm old enough and mom and dad are still hanging on. And it may be there's a point in time where, yeah, you are old enough. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to get in trouble. It's on you. And they have to let go in the sense of the way they used to hold on. It can be difficult for the parents. It can also be difficult for the children at that age. Years ago, I bought this cassette tape and listened to the message, and it was entitled, How to Raise Good Kids Without Going Nuts. And the guy did a great job, but one illustration I thought was very pointed. He told his son, it's time to get your hair cut. It's kind of getting a little bit long. And in their family, it was typical that, no, you didn't get a haircut every week, every 2 weeks, but got a little long, and you short. In a month, 6 weeks or more, get long. Short. Well, he said, Dad, could I wait till next week? And at first, the father was kind of taken aback. I told you to get a haircut. What's the problem with getting a haircut? But then he just asked, he says, why do you need to wait till next week? And he said, we're having yearbooks made, yearbook pictures. And I don't want my hair to look skint. And I'd rather just wait 2 or 3 days, have my picture made the way it is now. It made good sense to his dad, but his dad got to thinking. At this point, his son was in the upper teen years. He was a junior or senior in high school. And his son had never once been defiant, rebellious. His son had demonstrated a love for God, for the Lord. He was a good Bible student. He was a Christian in every sense of the word. And so the father got to thinking, he said, son, no more rules. Now I think as a parent, I'm thinking, you gotta be kidding. You said no more rules? But his point was, if he's to the point, he's making decisions about obedience to God, and if he's not going to obey God, he's not going to obey me. Well, the reality is he had lived in such a way. His son had lived in such a way. He realized as a father he didn't need to make any arbitrary rules for his son. Obey your parents. It's easier on them, easier on you. And even as they get older and you get older, you listen to their advice. And probably there will be no one to give you better advice. Obey your parents. 3, think before you drink. And I'm talking now about drinking alcohol. You know, there's a big reason not to drink. Everything the Bible says about alcohol. It's either condemnations of drunkenness, warnings about alcohol, period, or such passages as 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 16 and 17 about our body being the holy temple of God. In other words, everything about the Bible is no, don't drink. But yet we live in a world that's become more and more a drinking world. And I could say that in this way. There was a time you would find, even in our country, prohibition, where it was against the federal law to drink. Well, then you fast forward, of course, there was the appeal. But then various counties and states would still be dry counties. And a lot of children grow up don't even know what a dry county is, but it means that no alcohol can be sold in that county. I lived in a dry county in Mississippi before we moved here to Alabama. And interestingly, the last time they tried to get it to pass, they put on the ballot a referendum for packaged beer sales. In other words, it's kind of like there's going to be no honky tonks, there's going to be no bars, there's not even a hard liquor. It's just you buy a 6-pack of beer at a store. That's the only thing you can do. And I'm glad to say that it did not pass. But yet you would find alcohol, whether beer, wine, most stores. And then, of course, there would be I guess you would say, the hard liquor sales as well. Well, sometimes people might say, well, hold on. And they're thinking, one drink's not going to hurt me. One drink's not going to hurt me. Let me tell you this. That person that is the alcoholic, the problem drinker, the one that drinking has basically destroyed his life and his family life, he started out with one drink thinking, one drink's not going to hurt me. And you absolutely, when you pick up that first drink, you never know but what you might become yourself, that alcoholic. And when you say, no, not me, never, you don't know that. You don't know that. I do not know of anyone, I do not believe there is anyone who ever took the first drink intending to be an alcoholic and destroy his life and the life of his family. But yet it happened. Somebody might also think, well, everybody's doing it. This everybody's doing it is a lie of Satan. I don't care what you say or what you speak of. Not everybody's doing it unless we're talking about breathing, eating, and taking in the proper and necessary fluids. Beyond that, there's very little you could say everybody's doing it. But I also would say, with drinking, it is the point in this culture, in this country, that we have become a culture of drinking alcohol. It's so very, very prevalent among adults, and it's become so very, very prevalent among young adults, youth, and even teens. It's sad that we've come to this point, but we're there. And it may not be that everybody's doing it, but there's a whole lot of folks that are. I imagine that even if some have been like myself, I was raised in a close, shall we say, sheltered environment in a sense that no, my parents didn't drink. They didn't associate with people that did. I was not in situations where people were drinking and just was not around it. But you get a little bit older. Maybe you go to a state school, especially so, and you're going to see a plenty of it. But here's the deal. No matter what others are doing, if it's not right, you don't need to be. In fact, you need to be avoiding it and being careful to avoid those people and those situations that would make it such a temptation to you that you'd want to give in. Because you got to always remember that first drink, that's the barrier between me living an alcohol-free life and potentially being an alcoholic. I never need to take the first drink. All this applies to drugs, every kind of drug. I mentioned to you this morning, I listened to a lot of lessons, and the one I've been listening to the last day or so is one that is from polishing the pulpit. An interesting thing is the man that is preaching is not a preacher. He is a policeman up in kind of central Alabama. But his lesson more so to youth, and he's talked about a lot of problems he sees, and particularly among youth in the area that he lives and where he is a policeman. He's talked a lot about drugs. He's talked a lot about alcohol. And he sees the trouble that it brings to people's lives. Next, ditch dirty thoughts before they ditch you. Your thinking. What's in your heart, it matters. Proverbs 23 verse 7, for as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And then we find in Proverbs 4:23, watch. One translation says, guard over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Just think of literally a guard, a sentinel, that is watching not now over a prison or over some precious valuable, but he's watching over his own heart. Guard your heart with all diligence. See, we need to keep our minds and our bodies pure, and it all does begin with the mind. When I first heard this lesson, I can promise you that the fellow that was preaching had no idea what was going to be coming down the pike as a result of technology. It would have been the case many, many years ago. Someone would have had to go into a store, be seen, be in public generally if he was going to view pornography. And nowadays, anything is accessible by way of internet. The privacy of one's own home, where no one sees or thinks no one knows. And it's become a great, great, great tragedy. It's become something that's affected so many, and I'd say it's very good otherwise, people. And something, once again, we must be on guard against. Next, choose a date fit for a mate. Like I said, it kind of begins to get corny with some of the rhymes. And you know, when I heard this, I thought, well, okay, come on now. I'm not going to marry everybody I date. And I have an idea that all of those who are older here, if I were to say, did you ever date somebody that you wouldn't marry? Well, yeah. I dated them. I knew I wasn't going to marry them. Well, you can be sure, if you only date Christians, you'll marry a Christian. And there is no way to emphasize the importance of marrying a Christian. I had a friend that as she was raising, she had 2 boys. Every night she'd say, brush your teeth and marry a Christian. Every single night. Brush your teeth and marry a Christian. And I would just kind of say this, and I know this, somebody says, show me that in the Bible. Well, I can't, but I could say that the sentiment I think you'd have to say would be there. Be careful who you give your heart. Now you can talk about giving your heart, and you find that within the Scripture with reference to God. Not so much, okay, here's a young lady or a young man I'm dating. Watch who you give your heart to. It could become to the point that you're so attached emotionally, mentally, that it becomes very, very hard to unattach, to break it off. And if at some point along the way you find, I don't need this person, they're bad for me, they're bad news, they're probably going to make it hard to live a Christian life, they're the temptation, they're not going to make me closer to God. But you see, if you already attached, it's hard to turn back and say, no. Be careful who you give your heart to. And you be sure that it's somebody that's truly following God. Now I'm going to stop right here, because when I say marry a Christian, somebody says, wait, they've been baptized. I mean more than that. There's a lot of people who've been baptized and they're not living a Christian life. I'll never forget the fella, he's about my age. He married before he finished high school. The girl's a couple of years older. She was a little out of high school. And I'd kind of grown up with him. Yes, he had been baptized. He married a young lady who had been baptized. And about as soon as they got married, they quit worshiping regularly at all. Oh, I'll say this. They were working odd hours. And many times they were working, it would have been an interference with the assembly. But the reality is they didn't go when they could. And I went to see him out of concern. I called his name. I says, you're never in church anymore. What's going on? And here was the excuse I was given. And he called his wife's name. We really love each other. We work opposite schedules. We don't get to see each other much. And sometimes when we're finally off on Sunday and we're together, we just want to spend that time together. They loved each other so much. About 5 years later, they were divorced. I have an idea that if their love was centered in the Lord, and they were both truly living the Christian life, 5 years later, there wouldn't have been a divorce. In other words, you make sure that they're truly following God. Next, and again, I said they get kind of corny. Don't go steady until you're ready. See, sometimes, maybe it's a little more with adolescents rather than being young adults. But this idea, I got to have a boyfriend. I got to have a girlfriend. No, you don't. And maybe it's best not to. I know that sometimes we think, well, everybody's got their boyfriend. Everybody's got their girlfriend. I don't. So what? It's better to wait and find the right one than to rush in and have the wrong one. Years ago, I was listening to a marriage seminar. The speaker said, and I have no reason to doubt his statistics, but he said 85% of teenage marriages end in divorce. 85%. It's talking about both our teenagers when they marry. I think the statistic probably would have been from kind of 80s, 90s. But are you a little shocked? I was a little shocked. You'd be willing to wait for what's truly the right one and the time when both are ready. Next, pick the right friends. Pick the right friends. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. A young lady asked if it's okay to wear a white dress into a coal mine. The answer is yes, but you can be sure it won't be white when you come out. You pick all the wrong kind of friends. You go into it, you haven't been in trouble. Probably by the time you get away from those friends, you will be in trouble. The wrong friends will lead you into all kinds of trouble. Years ago, there was a young man. He was a little bit older than I was. And I made the statement he had gotten into trouble. In fact, he'd gotten into quite a bit of trouble. And I said to my dad, well, he got in with the wrong crowd. And my dad turned and looked at me and says, he became the wrong crowd. And that was the reality. We get in with the wrong crowd and then we become the wrong crowd. You know, be careful to pick the right friends. This is not to say you're rude or disrespectful to anyone. But the ones you go places with, the ones that become closer to you, the ones you buddy with, pick the right friends. The next, like I said, sometimes gets corny, act your age in a car. My dad, he sometimes was comical, and one time he had a angioplasty, a heart procedure. He was down at what was the old St. Margaret's Hospital, and I walked in, and he says, watch this, son. And, you know, mind you, he's on this monitor. It's got the blood pressure rate, it's got the heart rate, it's also got the respiratory rate. And he goes like this. He goes, and he holds his breath until the respiratory rate gets down to 0. Dad, act your age. I don't know if that's what he wanted for an answer from me, but that's kind of what I felt like. Dad, act your age. Well, driving a car, it is a big deal. It's a big deal. Why? There have been more Americans killed by cars than by all those killed by nuclear weapons in the world. Okay, let's take it a step lower. There have been more Americans killed by cars. Tomorrow's Memorial Day. There have been more Americans killed by cars than by all Americans killed in all the wars and skirmishes that this country has fought. My mother was killed as a result of an automobile accident. She was 53 years old. All of her children have outlived her by several years. Most families have been touched by horrible accidents, maybe even losing someone as a result of an automobile accident. You don't want that to happen to you. Neither do you want to be the cause of it. You get behind that wheel, that's a serious matter. A serious matter indeed. And by the way, once again, when I first heard this lesson, there were no cell phones. In fact, cell phones would have been like science fiction back then. And yet, nowadays, when you see ads about driving, it's not just drunk driving, it's what they call distracted driving, where somebody is letting that phone become the distraction. And then that phone makes you about as dangerous as the drunk driver. There is nothing worse than pick up the phone and you're speaking to a state trooper or some other law enforcement personnel about a person you love and they've been in an accident. It's exactly what happened to me with my parents. And no, they weren't distracted. And I don't know exactly what caused it. It was an older lady that was driving the other car across interstate median, hitting them. But drunk and distracted driving has been horrible, horrible, horrible. Next, love God and your neighbor. We made mention of this morning. Matthew 22:34 through 40. And it's kind of like there's some things you get right and everything falls into place. You get this right, everything else will be right. As I made mention about listening to that sermon and the father and son, do you love God? Son, do you love the church? Son, are you going to determine to do the right thing? Yes, 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 Dad. You know that. No more rules. If we get the loving God and following God and obeying God down, things fall in place. And now lastly, live carefully. The soul you save may be your own. When both of my children were born at that time, we were in the Mobile Infirmary in Mobile, Alabama. Their practice was, if you, as a father, were with the mother during the childbirth, after the baby was born, they would kind of clean the baby up, let the mama see the baby, hold the baby, and then the nurse gave it to the father, and the father, accompanied by the nurse, would take the baby to the nursery. And I'm carrying that baby, first Beth in Brooks, and I'll tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking, this little girl, this little boy has a soul that will never die. And more than anything else, I want to see the soul of my children in heaven. And I can promise you this, that's exactly what your parents want for you. But also, that's what I hope that you want for yourself. And for all that might be accomplished in life. You know, maybe it's good grades. Maybe it's finally a college degree. Maybe it's a graduate degree. Maybe it's that first big job, the career job. And maybe it's moving up the ladder with that job. Maybe it's making the money. Maybe it's getting married. Maybe it's things you do, places you go. But here's the bottom line. Nothing matters once this life's over. Nothing matters other than going to heaven. All the others insignificance in comparative to Judgment Day. Live carefully. The soul you save may be your own. All through life, I need to be thinking, I'm going to meet my Lord in judgment. I'm going to meet my Lord. And there's going to be heaven or hell. I'm going to die. It may be now. It may be years from now. It may be I'm so old I can't remember being young. But I'm going to die. And I want to die and I want to be ready. Like I said, this is some things kind of for youth, kind of for graduates, but most of these things, they apply to us, don't they? Even those of us who are older. Maybe not the dating part, but many of these things we've talked about. And as we close, I want to ask everyone, are you ready for that day? And I'd beg of you, determine, get ready. Don't think in terms of you can at the last minute suddenly get ready. You may not have that opportunity. You may not know that death is coming and suddenly life is snuffed out. God will save us by His grace. Will you obey Him? We could assist you with that obedience tonight. We could assist you with baptism. We could pray for you. If you need to come, please come.